The dog found out a terrible thing at the airport because the owner did not bring the vaccination certificate. So the dog could not get on the plane. But the owner, in order not to delay the work, deliberately lured him away and then get on the plane alone. And when the dog reacted to realize that the owner has left him and quickly closed the cabin door, the dog seems to realize what can only helplessly frozen in place, usually very loving his master, but today will abandon their own. When the staff announced that the plane could take off, they were suddenly surprised to find a dog rushing towards the plane despite the danger, only to see its eyes full of anxiety and fear, mouth whimpering urgently. Then the dog gritted his teeth and came to the starting line as if he had made up his mind to stop the plane from taking off with his weak body. Seeing that the plane has not yet taken off, the dog rushed to the wing towards the plane to call his master. I thought it was just that the owner had carelessly forgotten about him, but when the voice of the dog attracted everyone, the owner was the only one who froze in place and pretended not to hear it. Because a man who has never loved you is a man who has never loved you. Because it's hard to touch someone who has never loved you, no matter how hot your heart is. But as the plane started up again, the dog couldn't keep up with his master. The moment he met his master, the dog gave his life to you, but in front of his dreams and future, the dog seemed to be an insignificant character. As the master embarked on the future and dreams of the plane gradually away, only to leave, the love of your dog is still chasing the same place, eyes showing confusion and reluctance as if its world in this moment was taken away from part of it, also gradually realized that they may be abandoned. From that day on, the dog never left the airport in order to wait for its owner to come back to pick it up, not realizing that the wait was 2 years. This is based on a true story. Luckily, the airport maintenance man took him in temporarily, but he kept looking in the direction of the airport runway, and whenever a plane landed, he would run over to it with a longing and anticipation in his step. This tiny figure illustrates in his actions the unwillingness to be lost and the passionate hope of being reunited, and then crouches next to the airplane hoping to find his owner in the crowd. But not only do humans dislike him, they deliberately step on his paws. The dog was also causing a major disturbance at the airport, so security guards were dispatched to catch it for the safety of the customers. The dog is no match for the security guards, who are soon confined to the bus, and the head of security is about to get a gun to get rid of the dog as soon as possible. Unbeknownst to him, the little boy heard all this, so without thinking, he climbed through the window of the bus to save the poor dog before the security guards could get their guns. But the dog, who had just been abandoned and hurt by humans, had a strong look in his eyes and was no longer afraid to approach humans. The boy could only hold back his fear and slowly reach out to the dog, but the dog didn't attack him. The boy was able to open the car door and let the dog go to his death. When the chief of security realized it was too late, he came to the boy in a rage, determined to show him what he was made of. But then the captain of the plane suddenly arrived and the security chief immediately complained, expecting the captain to give him a piece of his mind. But what happened next left him staring in disbelief. The security guard came to the boy in a rage and was determined to show him a lesson. But then the captain of the plane suddenly came to the security chief, saw this and immediately complained. I thought that the captain would take it out on himself, but the next scene made him incredibly wide-eyed. It turned out that the captain was the boy's father, and the security chief had no choice but to speak up. Late at night, the boy ran out alone, intending to buy a ticket to leave, but because of the age of the staff suspected that he had no choice but to take advantage of the staff did not pay attention to sneak into the landing gear of the plane. He thought he could get away with it. But then the dog suddenly appeared in the daytime and kept barking at the boy. It was about to be discovered, but the dog did not want to stop. Not surprisingly, this unusual situation immediately attracted the attention of the airport staff. The boy's eyes were full of puzzlement and a panic, so he jumped off the plane and fled with the dog. Otherwise his father would have taken him back. It turns out that his parents are divorced and he was dependent on his mother has passed away, so he had no choice but to be taken over by his father. But only know the work of his father never cared about the boy, which is why he ran away from home thought. But looking at the dog who betrayed him, the boy was helpless, not realizing that the dog was saving him. The next day, his father heard the news and immediately rushed to the airport, and when he lifted the curtain, he realized that his son had slept with the dog last night, and he immediately dragged him up. But because he had never had a father's love, the boy did not want to go home with him without his father to protect him from the wind and rain, the lack of which often made him feel lonely inside. Seeing the tension between father and son, the maintenance man immediately came out to ease the situation and let him leave on the pretext that he would miss the plane soon. But as soon as his father left, the boy began to complain that if the dog hadn't messed up last night, he would have been on the plane by now. But the old man said it was the dog that saved your life, because once the plane reaches 10,000 meters in the air, the temperature around it will drop dramatically, and then the consequences of staying in the landing gear are unimaginable. Not only did the dog stay up all night last night, but he also kept you warm. Hearing this, the boy realized that he had wrongly blamed the dog. At this moment, the two lonely souls seem to find some kind of bonding. Their destiny is also changing quietly. From the stewardess, he learned that the dog's name was Palmer, and that his owner had forgotten to bring the vaccination certificate when he boarded the plane yesterday, which prevented the dog from boarding. The man was so anxious that he wanted to kneel down and beg the stewardess for forgiveness. Seeing this situation, the stewardess was going to turn a blind eye, but just then was caught by a sudden supervisor. Life is always full of all kinds of complicated situations and choices when the future and emotional conflict. Perhaps he believes that the importance of the future than everything else, so he decided decisively chose the former. Unbeknownst to him, this choice will leave him with a deep sense of guilt and regret at some point in the future. After listening to the story, the boy felt the same way because he himself had a similar experience of abandonment, and in order to help his former self, the boy made a life-changing decision. The dog at the airport suddenly found in front of the eyes appeared a figure very much like his master. It cannot be happy immediately. Chased after it from the speed of his running, it is easy to see that he has not eaten for a few days and then followed to the airport. But just as the dog licked the palm of the man's hand, but found that the taste is not, the owner looked at the strange face of its mood once again fell to the bottom. The airport is crowded with people, but there is no place for him to stay, and not even a glimmer of hope. When the security guards tried to catch him from behind, he even gave up resisting. In the nick of time, the boy appeared, holding a stick in front of the dog, and told Palmer to run away, fearing that the security guards would hurt him. With the boy's help, the two of them managed to escape from the encirclement, and their relationship changed subtly at that moment. At this moment, the staff suddenly came to him and gave him the address of Parma's owner, who had heard about Parma's story from a colleague, but had been pressured not to give it to him. The dog looked back as if to express his gratitude to the boy, but he could not speak. Back at the repairman's house, the boy didn't even bother to eat. So he wrote a letter to Palmer's owner to tell him what had happened to the dog, but it didn't last long. Just then the captain's father showed up with a car full of professional dog catchers who were determined to take the dog down. It turns out that the supervisor found the captain's father today and not only demanded that he take full responsibility for the incident, but even threatened him with his job if he didn't get rid of the dog, or your dream of becoming a pilot would be destroyed. With his job on the line, the captain's father had no choice but to send Palmer to the slaughterhouse. The boy rushed to catch up with the car, but how could his good heart keep up with the selfishness of mankind? As the car drifted away, he sat on the ground, helpless, with no hope of ever seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. At this moment, he wished that yesterday he had been hiding in the landing gear, frozen to death and crushed at 10,000 meters. After all, the captain's father wouldn't notice anything when he flew, including his family and affection. Seeing that his son is going to leave home again, the father was completely angry during the argument. The boy was afraid that his father would damage the sweater that his mother had knitted for him, and his emotions instantly became tense, because this is the only thing that his mother had left for him to think about. Adults are busy in the workplace. They always use money to try to fill the child's heart that longs for family love. Gully thought to give the child rich material. Child needs the most is the companionship. At this time, the father also found his son during the day to write a letter to Parma. Master learned the original story. He sat quietly here in his mind, constantly recalling every child's sadness images. The father was overwhelmed with emotion. The letter seemed to be writing about a dog, but every word spoke of his son's heart. Looking at his son's back, he realized that he owed his son too much and decided to do something for him. They immediately went to the dog trader's house where they had caught the dogs during the day, but unexpectedly the stewardess was also there. And after some inquiries, they realized that Palmer had already escaped and let all the dogs go. While everyone was confused, the boy suddenly thought of something. So the three of them went to the airport, and today was the day that Palmer's owner left on flight 1208. The dog was there, and as usual, he stood quietly by the landing gear and watched every passenger coming off the plane. But he was disappointed that his owner still hadn't shown up. Luckily, the boy was able to comfort the dog and promised to stay with him until he found his owner. The boy's father was also touched by the scene, so the next day he invited his reporter friend to find Palmer's owner as soon as possible through the media publicity. But this behavior directly angered the boss. The captain's job was on the line, but then a phone call made a miraculous at the airport. In the presence of the press, they finally waited for the IL-18, and the unforgiving hatch was opened, and Palmer recognized his owner at once. But the man's face was full of astonishment, as if he couldn't believe that Parma had waited for him for 2 years. And then he was so touched by the dog's loyalty to him that he wanted to come up and recognize him. But as he came down, he became apprehensive, ashamed of having abandoned him. There were so many emotions in the man's eyes on this short journey, but Palmer couldn't catch the love. As his master beckoned to him, Parma took a couple of steps back, but by instinct, he finally stepped forward and kept his eyes on the boy. The master forced Parma's head back. The boy knew he had to let go, so he walked towards the man and reluctantly handed him the leash, then walked away, holding back his tears. Unbeknownst to him, Palmer's eyes were following him the moment he turned around, looking at his son's feigned strength. The father witnessed all this and felt very bad about it. Then he called the man alone and said he wanted to buy Parma, no matter how much he wanted to pay. Even the keys to his favorite car were exchanged. But the man refused to sell, not because he had a clear conscience, but because the company was under pressure from the public, and his bosses were constantly pressuring him to bring Parma back if he wanted to keep his job. It turns out that love can be disguised. Thus, under the cameras of many reporters, the man took Parma on the plane, but when he reached the boy, Parma refused to leave. The man pulled on the rope with great force, and in his eyes, Parma clearly saw dislike and impatience. Disappointed, Parma took 2 steps back and realized that the boy was the one who really loved her. Palmer struggled to get back to his master, and everyone around him was shocked by the reversal of the situation. At last, he broke away from his master and rushed towards the boy without thinking. But the next moment the rope was stomped on by the security guards who cruelly kept the boy away from Palmer. Understanding Palmer's true intentions, The boy could not remain calm and even called out for the first time during his struggle. The father in the cockpit decided to do the same for his son and switched off the plane's instruments. The superintendent soon came to him and threatened to fire him for starting the plane. When the father didn't budge, the superintendent was ready to ask the co-pilot to take his place, but the co-pilot refused to carry out her orders too. Rules can take a back seat to emotions, and the captain apologized to his colleagues before being removed from his position. The colleague was also touched by what he had done, and she went to the man with tears in her eyes and said that the dog could not get on the plane without a vaccination certificate. The boss learned of the situation and angrily rushed to order them to take off immediately, but the stewardess still insisted that no vaccination certificate is not allowed. More and more co-workers sided with them, and eventually even the supervisor was touched. At this moment, Palmer also looked at the man with a pleading look in his eyes. The man knew that the last thing he could do was to let the dog go, and that he was no longer worthy of being his master. So he took Parma's leash off. With that, Parma rushed off the plane with his tail wagging towards the boy with his eyes full of him.